Hey, thanks for tuning in. In this video, we're going to talk about Paul, also known as Rabbi Sha'ul. We should just treat Paul as a rabbi. Now, when people start getting into kind of the Hebrew Christian circles or the Messianic Jewish circles, they've heard all along coming into that the law is bad, that the New Testament teaches the law is bad, and just look in the Gospels how the Pharisees were attacked and the teachers of the law were repeatedly attacked, and that they were told that they were doing the wrong thing. Well, as people begin to recognize when they're moving into those groups, they realize that that's not really what's going on. They realize that a lot of the times in the Gospels, especially in the Synoptic Gospels, the first three, we see that these attacks are against the traditions of the elders, typically. They're not against the law as in the written Torah, but they're against these rabbinic enactments and these rabbinic interpretations that add to the law and remove from the law and otherwise change the law. So the problem is not the Torah. The problem is the traditions of men, the traditions of the elders, and the forsaking of the Torah for the sake of those traditions. And so we see repeated attacks against the rabbis, against these Pharisees who were changing the law. They were not teaching the law as they should. And so when we look at, for example, Matthew 23, we see all sorts of indictments of things that they've done to add to the law and take away from the law. That they teach certain commands, but they don't adhere to others, and then they change the law otherwise. And so we see this over and over, and we see this concept that it's not the law, it's not the Torah that's the problem, it's these rabbinic teachings. And what I've seen a lot of times is whenever we're defending the belief in the law, that a lot of times Christians will come to us and say, well, Paul says such and such, some questionable thing about the law. And a lot of time and effort is spent in Messianic circles, at least what I have witnessed, figuring out ways to defend things that Paul said, figuring out ways to prove that Paul was actually teaching the Torah. And kind of the standby that I've seen is the argument that, well, Paul is a Pharisee, which is based upon what he said seems to be true. He did indeed say such a thing and that he was educated in that. So Paul is a Pharisee, he's a rabbi, and Rabbi Sha'ul is a Torah teacher. And that seems to be kind of the universal way to fall back on the issue and just think, well, somehow this questionable thing is really a rabbinic teaching of some sort. It's just something we're not understanding. Or, see how this really is, he's a Torah teacher. And kind of a personal belief of mine, a personal practice that I try to do, and I think the Torah somewhat supports this, is that I think we should try to be ideologically consistent. So whenever we're making judgments on issues, or whenever we're trying to apply logic or analysis of a situation, I think we should try to be consistent in how we do this. That we should try to use kind of a constant set of criteria when we're analyzing a situation. And we should try to be consistent in how we do this judgment. And indeed, the Torah talks about issues of having equal weights and measures, so to speak, and some people interpret that also being not literal and also in a symbolic way. But it also does talk about you're not supposed to consider the face of the person that in the judgment. You're not supposed to consider the rich above the poor and that sort of thing. So there is this idea that we should be consistent in judgment. And I think that when we're talking about this issue, that we recognize that Paul is a rabbi, and people call him Rabbi Sha'ul. And so in recognizing that he's a rabbi, how would we be treating other rabbis whenever we are, for example, looking to study the Torah? Are we going to be spending a huge percentage of our time trying to figure out how to defend some certain rabbi that may or may not have even been teaching correctly according to the written Torah? Or should we be spending our focus and our time studying what the actual Torah, the actual written Torah says? And I think that considering that we know Paul is a rabbi, and considering that we know a lot of these rabbinic teachings are not what the Torah says, I think we need to focus more on the Torah. And whenever we're dealing with accusations about Paul said this questionable thing, what do we have to say about it? Well, what would we say if some other rabbi was being attacked, or the words of some other rabbi, or those words were being used against us in our defense of the written Torah? Well, we're not going to be spending a whole bunch of time trying to figure out how to work that into being somehow pro-Torah. We're just going to recognize, hey, the Torah is what matters. The written Torah is what's important. Let's focus on that. And we can prove the written Torah from itself. We can prove it using other sources as well. And so let's focus on the written Torah. We could be spending a lot of time focusing on all kinds of rabbis. And indeed, Paul does claim to be speaking on behalf of God at times, and he does claim to be speaking inspired words at times. But so do some of the rabbis, so do other rabbis. And so we should be considering that, yeah, these rabbis claim to speak on behalf of God. Yeah, some of them claim to speak on the level of God. And yet Paul is also a rabbi, and he's doing the same thing. Let's treat all those rabbis as rabbis, and let's treat the written Torah as the written Torah. Let's make the written Torah our focus. Let's study what the commands actually are. Let's study what God actually desires of us. Thanks for watching. Feel free to like this video and share it if you think it could be useful to someone. And feel free to subscribe if you haven't already, so we can stay in touch and continue this conversation. Thanks for watching. Remember the commands. Peace.